episode 18 today for the weekend edition of Beezy's Stream of Consciousness podcast. Today is Saturday, June 16th of 2024. Tomorrow is Father's Day. And we had a busy day today and a busy day yesterday. That's why we did the podcast yesterday. I want to tell you all about what Susan, Brandon, and I did today. It's a lot of fun. We'll also have story time. We've got another chapter to read in Cloaks and Barbs, and things are getting really good in the book. So if you're just now tuning in to the podcast, then I would definitely recommend that you go back to some earlier episodes and get caught up on the book, especially if you like historical fiction that's got a weird twist to it. And we will get into that momentarily. But I wanted to tell you today, well, let's get this out of the way. Today's show is brought to you by Dallas Off-Road, and the reason that they do today is because they had an event up at the Bridgeport Off-Road facility, the trails up there, and we went, and because Susan has her Jeep, the Sea Goddess 2018 Jeep Wrangler JK stock. It is a manual. But we went up there today to do a little wheeling, as they say, and we had a really great time. Met some really interesting people, saw some great Jeeps, and had a great time climbing hills and going through muddy holes and nasty holes, and the Jeep's all dirty, which means it's beautiful because Jeeps are supposed to be covered in mud. As the Jeep advertisement said back in the day, they're beautiful even when they're clean. So anyway, it was a good day, and we've been busy all weekend. We were busy yesterday. Got an early start this morning. Went up to Bridgeport, did our off-roading. Came home this afternoon. Did a little bit of swimming. Did some other stuff around the house, and finally getting things calmed down so that I can join you and do our podcast. So here we are, and we are coming to you from Starbase One, and I've got looks like two of my staff have already turned in for the night. Elsa, our producer, and Willie, our engineer. They've had all the fun that they can stand. So it's just me and Finland in here tonight, and but we'll do the best that we can. And so stay tuned, and we'll jump right into Cloaks and Barbs. All right, and we are here with Chapter 8 of Cloaks and Barbs. And like I said, if you are just now tuning in and you're wondering, what in the heck are you doing, Beezy? I am reading from my book, Cloaks and Barbs. We've made it through 7 chapters so far, and if you need to get caught up, check out earlier podcasts, and you can hear all the previous chapters. So here we go, Chapter 8, USS Barb. "Give me 5 full sweeps," Matthews ordered as he turned the search periscope in a full circle, scanning the dark roiled sea for any contacts. Dunaway activated Barb's radar unit and watched the screen intently as the antenna atop the radar mast slowly revolved, radiating its energy out over the waves. "Nothing yet, Skipper," Dunaway said after the 3rd sweep. "He might just be beyond our detection range," Matthews murmured. "I hope." 5 sweeps, Dunaway said after a few more moments. He looked at the captain and shook his head. No joy. "Damn it, I know he's out there," Matthews fumed. He thought for a moment, his lips compressed into an angry line. "Surface the boat, Robert. Let's close the gap some. All ahead full, steady as she goes on course 245. Aye, sir." USS S-24, SS-129. "Well, where the hell are we, Chief?" Lieutenant Commander John Snell shouted as the storm raged around them. He stood on the bridge of S-24 as she wallowed in rough seas in the middle of a driving rainstorm, along with 2 drenched lookouts, a telephone talker, and a chief quartermaster's mate. Snell and S-24 were having a tough patrol ever since leaving Portsmouth 3 days earlier. S-24 had been commissioned 20 years earlier and was well past the end of her useful U.S. Navy life. Admiral Jones had told Snell before he sailed that this would be S-24's last patrol for America. When she finally made port at its conclusion, she would be transferred and sold to the Royal Navy to help train new British crews. Snell and his crew would be rotated back to the States, where they would fill billets on new construction Vallejo-class boats going down the ways at Groton's Electric Boat Company. For Snell, that time could not come fast enough. S-24 was his first command, but she took all of his skill and training to keep her in fighting trim. Her piping was so old that she had sailed with 2 British shipfitters loaned to him by the Vickers Armstrong shipyard to keep up with the leaks. She could not dive below 120 feet any deeper, and her pumps would swamp from all the seawater flowing into the bilges. Both of her New London ship and engine diesels desperately needed replacement, and one of her 2 electrodynamic electric motors was out, forcing Snell to have to maneuver submerged on only one shaft while barely making steerage way. The cranky main engines could only give him a maximum speed of 12 knots, 2 knots below her rated top speed. One of her fuel tanks was seeping fuel oil into one of her trim tanks, making depth control difficult. The outer doors on 2 of her forward torpedo tubes refused to open. Their controls were so corroded with rust that they had seized up, rendering them useless. So Snell had only 2 forward tubes with which to attack any German or Vichy French ships. And as if that wasn't enough, the pitchboard, which measured the submarine's relative speed in a seaway and was integral to dead reckoning navigation, was giving erratic readings. The results were that Snell's navigators could not accurately plot S-24's position, nor could his fire control team rely on technology to help them plot an attack. They would have to navigate by sextant and attack visually. Chief Quartermaster's Mate Charles Mason was a 15-year Navy veteran and was S-24's chief of the boat, as well as the backstop for her inexperienced navigator, Ensign Glenn Nichols. He had been taking star sightings before the storm blew in and had relayed them to Nichols, whose chart table was a mess of unrolled, wet charts that had been smeared and spattered by the numerous overhead leaks in the boat's cramped control room. "That landmass over there, sir," Mason shouted back, pointing to a dark shape on the horizon off the port quarters, the very tip of Cornwall, Land's End, I think the Brits call it. "Are you kidding me, Chief?" Snell hollered. "We're miles off course." "Yes, sir," Mason said. "If Mr. Nichols didn't realize it until I took those star sightings about half an hour ago. I recommend we do a 180. "You're telling me," Snell raged. "That puts us smack dab in the middle of Barb's kill zone. Helm, hard about," he yelled into the voice tube. The sound-powered telephones had also proved to be unreliable, so messages were either passed by hand or via the old-style voice tubes. The helmsman in the control room below turned his wheel against its stop, and the old submarine began to slowly swing around. "Surface contact," yelled the starboard lookout, suddenly pointing into the rain and darkness. 2 degrees to starboard. Snell put his binoculars to his eyes and strained to see. The rain was falling across his field of vision from left to right, and the 5-foot seas made the 853-ton S-24 bob up and down like a cork, making any visual sightings difficult. After several moments of staring into the gloom, he thought he could make out a dark shape low in the water at the very edge of his visibility. "Mr. Tyler," he called down to the conning tower, "train the search scope to 010 relative and tell me what you're seeing." Lieutenant Stanley Tyler, Snell's executive officer, was standing watch at the periscope pedal in the control room when he heard the call. Water from various drips and from the open bridge hatch was falling freely into the control room, and most of the watchstanders present were wearing some sort of foul-weather gear. Tyler trained the periscope out to the proper bearing and adjusted the magnification. Presently, he could make out a dark silhouette trailing a slightly phosphorescent wake. "Looks like a submarine, Captain," he called, "but I can't make out whose." "Damn," Snell muttered. It's got to be Barb. This is her patrol area. If they see us, they'll shoot first and ask questions later. We'd better hightail it out of here. Helm, let's put some sea between us and the contact. All ahead full. As Tyler continued to study the shape through the periscope, fighting to keep his feet as the boat heeled to starboard during her 180-degree turn, he walked the scope in a half circle, keeping his eyes trained on the mystery sub, when there was a sudden prolonged flash of lightning in the distance which briefly illuminated the strange vessel. Tyler squinted, and his trained eye quickly took in the shape of the sub's conning tower, the placement of its guns, and the length of the hull. The sharp clipper bow and long hull form of the Gato class, like Barb, looked nothing like what he now saw. Oh, my God, he breathed. Skipper, that's a U-boat out there. Snell frowned and looked aft. Say again, he asked over the voice tube. That's a U-boat, sir, Tyler said breathlessly. The hull's too short and the conning tower is different, too. I know what our fleet boats look like, and none of the Brit boats are anywhere close to us. It's got to be German, sir. Snell grimaced. When Admiral Jones had given him his sailing orders, he knew that most of the German submarines had been recalled, and he figured that his patrol would be largely uneventful. Privately, he felt that the chances of a U-boat blundering into his kill zone were remote, and the enemy would have to get through several other Allied boats' zones to get to him. Though no coward, John Snell nevertheless knew that his chance for success against a German boat with S-24 were not good. While his 38-man crew was as good as any he had served with, his old boat simply had far too many mechanical problems to be an effective weapon. Now, with an enemy submarine less than 3 miles away, his career and probably his life hung in the balance. There was no question as to his next move, however. He was the United States Navy submarine commander, and his job was to hunt down and destroy the enemy, wherever he found it, using whatever assets he had at his disposal. A most unorthodox plan began to form in his head. Mr. Tyler, he said slowly and grimly, reverse course, sound general quarters. U-534. Submarine, 5 kilometers off the starboard quarter aft, called one of the lookouts. Wirtz and von Kuiper both turned and looked to see a submarine cutting its way through the 2-meter seas. The lightning flashing in the sky overhead illuminated its shape which gave away its identity. Bert studied the shape briefly and dropped his binoculars. He's an American, he said tiredly. One of their older designs, I think. Prepare to dive the boat, Herman. The American? Von Kuiper asked. How did he get past us? He is in the wrong place. What does it matter? Bert asked. These seas are lousy with Allied boats now. This English Channel is a British and American lake, now that our boats have been recalled. He sighed. No matter. We will fight him, and we will kill him, and then we will go home. If there are more about, we will deal with them each in turn. Clear the bridge. USS Barb. 2 radar contacts, sir, Dunaway said, about 5 miles away by the look of it. Let me see, Matthews said, coming over to the repeater. He studied the 2 blue blips and consulted a nearby chart. Right on the numbers, he said after a moment. Right on course. Yeah, one of those fellas is our pigeon. What do you think the other one might be? This is our kill zone, Robert, he said. They're both Krauts. They can't be anything else. Probably another radar picket trying to rendezvous with our friend. Change course to intercept and get them into battle stations. Santiago 4. If you don't mind me saying so, Lieutenant, Wallace said, perhaps you and your lot should get back inside. All hell is about to break loose here, it seems. The wind was howling around the small hut, and the windmill in the back garden was spinning like a child's top. Large drops of water were now beginning to fall at a 45-degree angle, hitting everything in their path with loud plops. Every so often the sky would flash, and the deep darkness roundabout would transform into weird, otherworldly luminescence, making the American operators jump and look about fearfully. Good idea, Sarge, Barbara replied. Catherine and Thelma were already running across the front garden with their heads down, and they soon made their way indoors, looking wet and bedraggled. Now, where are the other 2, Barbara asked, peering into the gloom worriedly. They should be around back, Mum, Wallace said. I'll fetch them. You go back inside. As the Marine sergeant disappeared around the corner of the house, Barbara stepped back into the comforting smell of cooked sausages. He crept swiftly and silently around to the back of the structure, using the short wooden property barrier as cover. Electrical discharges in the atmosphere above him flashed intermittently, threatening to give away his position, so he crouched against the barrier on the far end of the property near some tall evergreen bushes, Another human sentry stood near the rear of the structure, and he could see it now as he talked to the two females. "Here you go, ladies," Lance Corporal Richard Edwards said as he opened the back door for Hattie and Eunice. They gratefully stepped into the back room and wiped the rain from their faces. Edwards shut the door and resumed his watch over the back garden and the windmill antenna assembly, standing under the tiny overhang that served as a sort of porch for caretaker Bartlett. In moments, Sergeant Wallace hurried around the corner of the house and joined him. "Are the other two Americans back inside, Dickie?" he asked. "Yes, Sergeant," Edwards replied, drawing himself up to attention. Wallace clapped him on the shoulder. "That's fine, lad," he said. "Keep your eyes on that antenna. Even in this weather, that bloody thing would make a lovely target for any ne'er-do-wells, it would." "Aye, it would, Sergeant, if one knew what it was. It looks like an armless old windmill to me, though. Nobody else knows really what it is now, do they?" "Vigilance, Dickie, vigilance," Wallace chided. "The word is that Jerry has his spies everywhere, he does, and I would hate to be the bloke who let one get past me." He nodded and pointed at the antenna as the rain came down in a deluge, turning the flower gardens around the porch into tiny seas of mud. "If that old devil Hitler does know about all these listening posts, you can bet your pension that he'll be moving heaven and earth to take them out. These machines are winning the war for us, they are." He winked and nudged Edwards gently in the ribs. "And I'll tell you something else, mate. Those birds down there are pretty special too, especially the Yanks. Not that our birds aren't first rate, mind you, but there's just something special about those Americans." He winked again. "You can keep that bit to yourself too, Dickie." "I'm keen on the French girls myself," admitted Edwards, blushing slightly. Wallace chuckled and watched the rain come down. "Each to his own, mate," he said as he pulled a cigarette out of his pocket. "Each to his own." They were looking directly at him, but he could see that they were relaxed and not as completely alert as sentries should have been. The shrubs and the wooden barrier hid his shape from view, as did the rain, which was more of an annoyance than anything else. It would, however, provide him with excellent cover to continue his mission the moment the sentries looked away. He waited patiently while the rain continued to fall. USS S-24. "He's diving, sir," said the portside lookout. "Increase speed to flank," Snell ordered as the rain pelted his face. The boat was wallowing in the heavy seas, and the helmsman in the conning tower were having difficulty maintaining course. "Helm, stay with him. Make ready tubes 1 and 4. "We're a sitting duck up here, Skipper," Tyler warned from his place at the periscope. "I recommend we dive and—" "Recommendation noted, Mr. Taylor," Snell replied. "Have sonar power up the active unit and extend the sonar heads." "Sir?" Tyler looked up through the hatch just as a wave crashed against the conning tower and a cascade of warm seawater drenched the bridge, conning tower, and control room crews. He coughed and spluttered, but stayed at his post. "Just do it, Stan," thundered Snell. "Get that sonar going before he comes about." USS Barb. "Contact 1 just submerged, sir," Dunaway reported as he watched the radar scope. "Contact 2 has increased speed." He looked over at the TDC and Chief O'Brien, who was busy updating firing solutions on both contacts. "Why do you think the second boat would stay surface, Chief?" "You got me, Mr. Dunaway," O'Brien said as he fed new data into the TDC. "The Krauts are a funny bunch." "Yeah, but they're not stupid. Contact 2 is blundering right into our sights." "Well, then, let's give him a proper reception," put in Matthews from his place on the bridge. "Sir, Contact 1 was turning away from us when he dove," Dunaway advised. "It was almost like he was turning towards Contact 2 for a submerged attack." "Well, in a little while, it won't make any difference what either of them were doing, Robert," Matthews said over the howl of the wind, "because both of them are going to be sitting on the bottom of the channel with holes in them." S-24. "The diesels are running flat out, Skipper," Tyler said, "but we're almost swimming down here. We've got 4 feet of water in the bilges and the pumps aren't keeping up. If it gets any higher, in the motor room will short out." "What about sonar?" Snell asked, ignoring Tyler's warning. "The transducers are extended and the unit is powering up, sir. I wish I knew what we were doing." "Go to active mode," Snell ordered. "Maximum power. Keep pinging until you get a contact." "Sir, you do know that they can home right in on our pings, right? Everybody and their cousins will be able to hear us for miles around." For the first time since they had sailed, Snell smiled. "I hope so," Mr. Tyler said. "I certainly hope so. Go active now." U-534. Range to target, said Wirtz as he watched the approaching American submarine through the periscope. 5,000. An echoing, high-pitched sound reverberated through the hull of the U-boat. Wirtz went pale and his eyes went wide. Active sonar? Asked von Kuiper from his place at the weapons console. Why would they do that? We can... Snapshot, Wirtz yelled. Set it up, schnell. USS Barb. Somebody's pinging, Norris called from the sonar shack. Which one? Dunaway demanded immediately. Sounds like Contact 2, Norris replied. But it doesn't sound like German sonar, sir. It almost sounds like those old active sets that we trained on back at New London in sub-school. They have that high-pitched sort of... Yes, sailor, I know what they sound like, Dunaway interrupted. We better be sure of this now. The shit's about to hit the fan, you know. Yes, sir. S-24. Sonar contact, yelled radioman third class Chester Beezy from his station at sonar. A ghostly image appeared on the scope directly in their path. 3,000 yards, dead ahead. Tyler relayed the information to Snell, who slapped the bridge bulkhead happily. That's it, he yelled over the sounds of the storm. Tyler, do you have a firing solution? Solution set, Skipper. He's right in the crosshairs. Match bearings and fire 1. There was so much noise and motion topside that at first Snell didn't even notice that the torpedo had left its tube, but it had. The telltale wake of bubbles was apparent even in the darkness and with the violent wave action. Torpedo away, Tyler sang out. The fish is running hot straight normal, sir. Time to impact 18 seconds. U-534. Torpedo in the water, dead ahead, screamed the sonarman. Fire 1, ordered Wirtz, and von Kuiper depressed the plunger on the weapons console. Right full rudder, all ahead flank. As soon as the torpedo had launched, the U-boat turned sharply to starboard, and her 1,000-horsepower electric motors began to whine as they spun up to maximum speed. USS Barb. Wow. Both contacts have fish in the water, Norris reported. Contact 2 has fired a second fish, sir. None of them are inbound. The 2 from Contact 2 will pass our bows from starboard to port. Skipper, I recommend we come right 10 degrees just in case those fish miss, Dunaway advised. Make it so, mister, Matthews said. Sonar, what's it look like now? Contact 2 is turning hard to starboard, Norris replied. Even from this distance, she sounds like a rattletrap. Dunaway smiled and looked over at Chief O'Brien, who was busy trying to keep track of the contacts and the torpedoes. That's got to be an S-boat, he said as he turned his attention to the periscope. They sound like threshing machines when their diesels are all wound up. So that clears up one mystery. What's she doing this far south, I wonder? No telling, Mr. Dunaway, O'Brien mumbled as he fought to make a clear paper record of the battle going on less than 2 miles away. Looks like all the fish are going to miss, sir, Norris reported. Contact 1 is hightailing it towards the Brit coastline, and Contact 2 is still heading out to seaward. He shook his head and chuckled. He's still pinging away like crazy, though. S-24. Both fish missed, sir, Tyler reported. Very well, Snell said, now soaked to the skin by the swirling rain. Where is the U-boat now? Tyler consulted with sonar briefly. He's about 4,000 yards off the port quarter, headed for the coastline. He hasn't turned yet. Understood. Change course to overtake and intercept, Mr. Tyler. Sir, Beasley said as he studied his sonar screen. New surface contact, bearing 295 relative, range 4,000 yards. Skipper, Tyler called, we've got company. Up on the bridge, Snell and the lookouts trained their binoculars to that part of the ocean less than a mile away off the port bow. Sure enough, they could see the low silhouette of a submarine bow-on steaming towards them. Snell was about to order a radical turn to flee when he noticed that the mystery sub's bridge signal lamp was blinking at him. He realized that it was a Morse message, and he quickly translated it in his head. Below decks, down in the control room, Tyler did the same as he watched through the periscope. Those watchstanders who could not see the message were surprised when they heard laughing and cheering coming from the bridge crew and the executive officer. The message read, "The cavalry has arrived. Make way for Barb." Santiago 4. Wallace stubbed out a cigarette as the rain continued to fall and the lightning continued to flash. The wind was whipping around the small building, and it was cold. Edwards gave a brief shiver. "Cold, are you, lad?" Wallace asked. "Just a bit damp, Sergeant," Edwards said. "Nothing a stiff wind can't take care of." Wallace smiled. "Now there's a good chap," he said, and he gave his subordinate a playful punch in the shoulder. "Right. I'll just have another walkabout and see how our Private Price is getting along in the front garden, shall I? On me way back, I might even pay a visit to old Bartlett inside and grab us some mugs of tea. That would be lovely, wouldn't it?" Edwards smiled. "Aye, that it would, Sarge." "I'm off then. Stay sharp, will you, Dickie?" Without another word, he turned and stepped off the small porch and into the rain. He disappeared round the corner of the house, leaving Edwards alone to guard the back garden and windmill antenna assembly. He peered out from beneath the porch overhang and looked up into the dark, forbidding sky. At that moment, there was a particularly bright and violent flash of lightning, seemingly to Edwards, directly overhead. It was so bright that Edwards saw a blue rather than white flash that temporarily blinded him. There was a sharp, deafening rapport, and he started so violently that he nearly lost his footing. With a groan, he stumbled backwards and crashed against the siding of the hut with his eyes tightly shut as he waited for the bright, painful after-images to disappear from his vision. That was the moment he had been waiting for. With the supervising sentry on the far side of the structure and the other sentry temporarily blinded, he stepped out from his hiding place and stepped easily over the wooden barrier. He quickly stole up to the antenna and began to climb up the metal framework. His sight told him that he would have to work quickly, for the supervising sentry would soon be returning to check on his subordinate. The metal was cool and slick with precipitation, and that combination slowed his progress. His forelimbs were not designed for this type of travel, even in the best of circumstances, and he found himself slipping several times on his way to the top of the tower. The fierce wind tore at his robes, exposing his lower limbs and torso. Wallace saw the blue flash and heard the thunderous report from the front porch, where he had been conferring with the other sentry, Private Norbert Price. "You stay here, lad," he said, and he sped off, sliding in the mud as he made his way round the house. "Dickie," he said when he saw his lance corporal slumped against the back door with his hands to his eyes. He knelt down to tend to the young man when there was another bright flash and loud crack overhead. Movement on the antenna caught his eye, and he turned to see a dark shape trying to negotiate the steel lattice work. Another flash lit up the entire area, showing that the interloper was wearing some sort of black robe that billowed away from its body. "Mother of mercy!" Wallace breathed as he saw that it looked like nothing he had ever encountered before. "What the devil is that?" Instinctively, he unslung his rifle, cocked the hammer, and brought the buttstock to his shoulder. He knew that he had been seen, but he did not have far to go. If he could get close enough to the top, where the electrical cable fastened to the top of the antenna structure, he could disable the entire assembly before the sentry could bring his weapon to bear. Wallace raised his rifle and sighted it on the largest part of the monstrous target, the torso, but his aim was spoiled by the crisscrossing network of steel support girders. Nevertheless, as he had been trained to do years before, he held his breath and gently squeezed the trigger. There was a sharp crack as the rifle fired. He heard the weapon's rapport as well as the almost instantaneous plink of the projectile hitting the antenna framework directly in front of his chest. With a great effort, he heaved himself further up and reached for the cable connection. He heard the click of the sentry working the action of his weapon as it loaded another shot. Just as his forelimbs brushed against the cable, there was another crack, and he felt a heavy thud against his right shoulder. The force of the blow caused him to lose his grip on the framework, and he began to fall back. "Gotcha, you bloody devil!" hissed Wallace as he loaded his third shot. "Have another one!" There was yet another crack and another blow, this one to his midsection. He knew instantly that this wound could possibly be fatal if not properly tended to, but he also knew that a fall from this height could be fatal as well. He flailed his forelimbs about, and one of them caught the cable. His feelers wrapped around it as he fell backwards and off the lattice work. Wallace watched as the creature fell with one of its arms tangled in the cable. The cable did not stop the thing's fall, but rather slowed it. The creature's weight was too much for it to bear, however, and the cable parted near the top of the windmill at the point where it fastened to the antenna assembly. Wallace saw a shower of sparks erupt from the top of the antenna as the creature fell to the ground in the brush beyond the white picket fence that ringed the property. "Down for the count, I should hope," he said to himself as he bounded across the back garden to ensure that his quarry was either dead or at least hors de combat. The rain did not lessen. In fact, it seemed to Wallace that he was in the midst of a maelstrom, complete with swirling, howling winds and almost constant lightning. His ears rang with the repeated roaring thunderclaps. He stopped on the near side of the fence and peered into the gorse and photinias that grew wild beyond the windmill. The shrubs had been planted years and years ago by the original farming family that had owned the surrounding land and had long been untended. The gorses rose to nearly 10 feet with great thick boles, while the photinias had grown to well over a dozen feet. It was obvious that something large and heavy had crashed through their tops, but his eyes could not penetrate the dense branches and dark leaves, especially in the driving rain. He reached along his belt for his hand torch, but it was not there. "Damn," he said quietly and stole a glance back towards the building, hoping to see where it might have dropped. At that moment, several things happened. He heard the rustle of leaves and the snap of bracken cracking behind him, and before he could turn around, he felt something cold and slippery wrap itself around his neck. There was another blinding flash of blue in the air around him and a sharp, deafening explosion of sound above him. In an instant, he was aware of a bluish-white tentacle of electrical current arcing down from the sky above and making contact with the metal of the windmill not 5 feet away from his face. His skin tingled and the hairs on his head stood on end despite being wet and being under his Royal Marines beret. The air left his lungs and he saw a small charge of electricity arc from the windmill tower to touch his uniform tunic just below his solar plexus. Millions of volts of electricity coursed through his body, stopping his heart and effectively roasting his internal organs from within. In his small farmhouse, Roger Bartlett saw the flash and heard the rapport, and his Marconi radio, which had been tuned to the BBC, promptly exploded with a boom. Shards of its wooden casing went in all directions, some hitting him in the face and arms. With a cry of pain, he fell to the floor of his kitchen, clawing at his ruined face. Private Price heard all of this and dashed through the front door towards the sounds of distress coming from the kitchen. 50 feet below Bartlett, Group Captain Hawthorne and his operators, the French on duty in the operations center, the British at their meals in the mess hall, and the Americans changing out of their wet uniforms in their quarters, were suddenly plunged into darkness. Weather patterns were always unpredictable, he reflected as he lowered the body of the sentry to the ground. The atmospheric electrical discharge had been completely random, the type of weather event that had always eluded his sight, but it could not have come at a more opportune moment. Not only had it effectively recharged his energy reserves, which would assist with his body's healing of its various injuries sustained from the sentry's weapons, as well as the fall, but it had also destroyed the electronics gear of the human listening post. A random act of nature had fulfilled his immediate mission. Now he turned his attention to the sentry who was blinking and shaking its head at the rear of the structure. It was still obviously stunned from the early electrical discharge. He knew that others were inside and knew that the communications team was somewhere beneath the structure. Seeing that their continued existence might prove to be an ongoing problem, he quickly decided to seek consultation. He paused and bent his will towards his comrades on the continent for further instructions. Also, there was still the matter of his original mission and its objective far to the north, which would have to be resolved before the others could begin arriving. His answer came a few moments later. Neutralize the human communications team and appropriate transport to the northern objective. Make haste, maintain all other mission parameters. He gathered his robes around him and began stalking through the rain towards the building. All right, that is the latest installment of Cloaks and Barbs. If you enjoyed it, and let's look forward to the next chapter tomorrow. Tomorrow is Father's Day, and I will have a special podcast for all the fathers out there, and we'll talk more about that tomorrow. So have a good Saturday evening. Stay out of trouble, eat your vegetables, drink your bread, and live long and prosper.